Back on the record in the Simpson matter, Mr. Simpson is again present before the court with his counsel, Mr. Shapiro, Mr. Cochran, Mr. Douglas, Mr. Blazier, Mr. Thompson, Mr. Scheck. People represented by Mr. Clark, Mr. Harmon, and Miss Clark, no relation. Jury is not present. Counsel, is there anything we need to take up before we conclude the cross-examination of Dr. Gerdes? Hearing nothing. Deputy Magnera, let's have the jury, please. The record should reflect that we've now been rejoined by all the members of our jury panel. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. All right, Dr. Gerdes, would you resume the witness stand, please? All right, good morning again, Doctor.
Good morning.
Doctor, sir, you were reminded you were still under oath, and Mr. Clark, you may continue with your cross-examination.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning. Good morning, Dr. Gerdes.
Good morning.
Dr. Gerdes, day before yesterday, you suggested that there might have been cross-contamination on various evidence items in this case, correct?
Yes, I did.
And you suggested that that cross-contamination that might have occurred during the extraction and evidence handling phase by Colin Yamauchi, correct?
Overruled.
I stated that it was consistent with that, yes.
Now, those are two different steps in the process, correct? That is, sample handling and DNA extraction.
Yes.
Those two acts or events take place in different rooms at the Los Angeles Police Department, at the Los Angeles Police Department Crime Laboratory.
They do.
Where does the sample handling take place?
That would be in the evidence handling room.
Evidence processing room?
Evidence processing room, yes.
Or EPR, as it's sometimes referred to in this case?
Yes.
DNA extraction takes place where?
That's in the serology laboratory.
Now, Dr. Gerdes, you would agree, wouldn't you, that there is a way by tracing the history of samples and how they are processed and handled to eliminate one or both of those possibilities of cross-contamination, whether in sample handling or extraction, by looking at the history of a particular evidence sample?
I'm not sure. No, I don't believe you can do that. I said that the two controls, to explain this, the two controls the amplification water control tends to be a control for introduction of contamination at that stage. And that particular control allows you to differentiate from that stage on the process of copying the DNA and anything preceding that. Now, really isn't a good control to differentiate the first two steps, which is sample handling and sample extraction, at least in the laboratory. Now, the substrate control would allow you theoretically to determine if there was DNA introduction earlier. If, for instance, the substrate controls were contaminated and all of the reagent blanks were clean around the same time, that would be definite indication that the source or the time at which the contamination occurred would be at the crime scene.
Dr. Gerdes, going back to my question, isn't there a way by tracing the history of a particular evidence sample to eliminate the possibility that cross-contamination occurred at one or both of those two stages?
No, the problem is that when you get to the final process, the final typing strip, if you see an indication of DNA on that strip, you have some idea as to what stage it might have been incorporated, but there's no proof. Because basically, for instance, the extraction blank, if it were contaminated, that basically tells you that something occurred in the handling in a laboratory or in the extraction process. But if the substrate control was contaminated, that could be either because it was contaminated at the crime scene, or the reagents that were added to that substrate control at the lab introduced DNA. So
Ask
that
the question again.
Thank you. Dr. Gerdes, what I'm asking you is, isn't there a way by tracing the history of a sample that may eliminate one or both of those possibilities of cross-contamination during handling and or extraction?
you can analyze the sequence of events, if that's what you're getting at.
All right, so instead of the history of a sample, you prefer the term sequence of events.
Yes.
You're familiar with item number 48, one of the blood drops at Bundy, correct?
Correct.
Describe for us the sequence of events with regard to item number 48.
Oh, okay. Item number 48, if I recall correctly, came in on the 13th of June, was handled at the processing room for drying. On the 14th of June, that particular item was processed at the same time as Mr. Simpson's reference sample and the Rockingham glove.
Well, objection, move to strike the last portion of the answer. Is that the entire history?
Yes, and the sequence in which that occurred was that Mr. Simpson's blood sample was handled first, and then the Rockingham glove, and then the item 52, and I don't remember the exact sequence, I can look it up, but the other Bundy drops after that.
Is that the entire sequence of events with respect to item number 48 and DNA testing?
There were also substrate controls that were processed at the same time.
Is
And that were done at that time as far as the cuttings.
Is that the entire DNA history of item number 48?
No, at that point, that item was, and at this point I'll have to look at my notes.
All right, would it refresh your recollection to look at your notes?
Yes. Okay, on the 24th of June, the item 48 was mailed to Cellmark. and it was mailed at the same time as 4950, the reference samples from all three individuals, and number 7 and 12, which are blood drops from Rockingham, and item 47, 52, 56, and 78. Those items were mailed in a package from LAPD on 6/24/94 to Cellmark. Department of Justice item 48 was mailed to the Department of Justice on August 12th, 1994, and it was mailed at the same time as item number 6, which is a blood drop from the Rockingham driveway, and items 47, 49, and 50, as well as the reference samples from Mr. Simpson, Nicole Simpson, and Ron Goldman.
Is that the entire history of those samples as far as DNA testing is concerned, Doctor?
They were then analyzed at those particular laboratories, and the substrate controls for those particular items for the Department of Justice,
Well, I'm
the
sorry, Your Honor.
substrate controls.
Objection. Motion to strike.
Sustained.
Dr. Gerdes, with respect.
Sustained. Sustained.
With respect to item number 48, is that the entire history as far as DNA testing is concerned?
Do you want me to go into the specific dates in which the DNA was analyzed, et cetera?
What I,
This question is vague in the form when he's talking about
Sustained.
history.
Rephrase the question.
Dr. Gerdes, with regard
It's
to
also a speaking objection.
Dr. Gerdes, with regard to item number 48, you have described it being seized. How many swatches were seized, collected?
Well, I don't recall right off, and I apologize, but I only brought what I felt were critical items to, I mean, I have 2 file drawers full of data on this. I would have to look it up, and I don't have it with me.
Okay. As far as these 2 swatches, I'm sorry, rephrase that. I'd like you to assume that there were 2 swatches collected with regard to item number 48 at the crime scene.
Okay.
With regard to those swatches, what happened with...
That hypothetical in terms of what was collected at the
Sustained.
crime scene.
As far as what was collected from item number 48, how many swatches did in fact Colin Yamauchi deal with when he extracted DNA from it, from one or more of them?
I believe yeah, again, I don't have that record with me. I can look that up.
So you're unable to tell us today...
How many swatches? No.
All right. With regard to item number 48, is it your recollection, is it your testimony that all of the swatches were in fact processed by Mr. Yamauchi? And I'm referring to DNA extraction.
Yes.
Incidentally, Dr. Gerdes, do you believe the number of swatches that are collected with respect to a particular stain is important?
I believe it's important to keep track of how many there are, and it's important, it would be important if they are, the ideal situation would be to take those swatches and put them in separate bindles at the time of collection so that they're not handled. It's a-
Objection, move to strike, non-responsive.
Oral. Cast
With-
again.
With regard to, Dr. Gerdes, these one or more swatches, it's your testimony Mr. Yamauchi extracted DNA from whatever was collected, whether it was one or if it was 2, he extracted from both of them.
I'm sure he did not extract from all of the swatches that were collected. It's important to reserve some of that evidence, and I'm sure he did that.
Wouldn't it be very important to know, in terms of your opinions about cross-contamination, whether or not he in fact did extract DNA from some of them, all of them, or none of them?
It would be important in terms of whether he handled all of them.
Well, wouldn't it be extremely important in terms of the potential of cross-contamination for you to know exactly how many of those swatches he took DNA from?
It would be basically important in terms of, it's not important in terms of what I see on the typing results that have been reported. It is important in terms of the potential to go back at least to the stage in the lab and perhaps do further analysis. It still doesn't control for what happened before that, and it doesn't control for the fact that those swatches, it is my understanding that they were all handled, they were all packaged at the same time. It doesn't matter how many swatches there were there on that morning of, or on the evening of June 13th when they were packaged and bindled. Those items were all handled at the same time. And so at this point, since I don't know exactly, or I can't be assured exactly of how those were handled and manipulated, at that point you have already have a suspicion, or may have a suspicion, as to the handling of the samples, because they were all handled. The swatches were all handled at that time. A subset of those may have been extracted at a later time, but because they were all handled together on that day, and because they were all handled together at the crime scene, you can't back this up all the way to the very, very beginning.
Dr. Gerdes, wouldn't it be extremely important to know, in terms of the potentials of cross-contamination, if Mr. Yamauchi extracted DNA from all of those swatches or only some of those swatches?
It would be important in terms of going back to those swatches and perhaps doing something with those again. But as far as the analysis of the data that I've looked at, it's not important to that. What I'm looking at is the typing result that he obtained from that, and the manipulation, not the extraction, but the manipulation of those swatches on that morning.
Is it your testimony that the steps in extracting DNA from a sample represent the exact same steps that are taken when one simply packages a sample for shipment to another laboratory?
No, it's my testimony that the manipulation process has the potential, whenever you manipulate these, it doesn't have to be DNA
Objection
extraction.
non-responsive, Your Honor.
Sustained.
Move to strike.
Answer stricken.
Dr. Gerdes, what I'm asking you is, are the steps of extracting DNA from a swatch the same exact steps that are taken when a swatch is simply packaged for shipment to another laboratory?
The DNA extraction procedures are similar in all of those laboratories.
No, what I'm asking you, Dr. Gerdes, is, are the steps the same for, one, taking a sample and extracting DNA from it, and two, simply collecting a sample from a storage location and sending it to another laboratory?
The steps should be the same, and that includes handling that substrate control in parallel between each evidence item that's handled.
Dr. Gerdes, aren't there steps in extracting DNA that include adding reagents, for instance, to a swatch?
Yes,
Aren't there steps that include, for instance, adding Chelex to a swatch?
yes,
When one simply grabs a sample from storage and packages it for shipment to another laboratory, is Chelex added to it?
no, but the sample is handled. It's manipulated
Objection
with gloved
non-responsive,
hands.
Your Honor.
Sustained.
Move to strike the answer.
Answer is stricken.
Dr. Gerdes, when you pick a sample up from storage, put it in a box, and send it to another laboratory, you don't add any chemicals to it, do you?
No,
You don't add Chelex to it?
no,
You don't put it in a microcentrifuge and spin the sample around, do you?
no,
You just put the sample in a container and ship it.
that's true.
It's never exposed to the DNA extraction process, correct? Under the situation I've just described.
Under what you've described, that's true.
Now, I'd like to turn your attention to item number 50. Can you describe the history of that sample? And that's referring to item number 50, another blood drop at the crime scene.
All right, Your Honor, I think that that is vague, term history.
Overruled. In the context of what we've just heard, I know exactly what's coming.
Item 50 was handled at that same, as far as manipulation of the swatches, on 6/13, if I recall. As far as bindling, then it was it was in the first set again. So it was in with that same set of initial LAPD DNA extractions on 6/14, and again in the manipulation stage, that particular item at the time of packaging, the order was Mr. Simpson's reference sample, the Rockingham glove, blood item 52, and then item 48 was one of the other four. I'm not sure which order, but it was one of those that, subsequent to that, as far as the manipulation and handling of that sample and bindling. Then on 6/14, it was one of the items that was set up for DNA extraction and then typed at LAPD, and it was mailed item 50, correct?
Yes.
It was mailed again on 6/24 to Cellmark. It was in that grouping that I mentioned earlier. And to the Department of Justice, it was mailed again on August 12th to the Department of Justice.
Can you tell, first of all, is that the entire history of that sample as far as DNA testing is concerned?
As far as its arrival at laboratories, of course, if you want to go into when it was extracted and so forth at each lab, that's not the entire history, but at that point then it was extracted and typed.
In other words, when these items were received by other laboratories, there were steps taken to type those samples.
Correct.
How many samples were collected with regard to item number 50?
How many swatches?
Correct, I'm sorry, swatches.
Again, I don't have that data sheet with me.
With regard to item number 50, wouldn't it be important to know how many of the swatches collected were extracted for DNA by Colin Yamauchi?
The form of the question.
Overruled.
Basically, the extraction process, again, is the second step in this procedure. So
Objection,
what
move
is
to
really
strike, Your
critical
Honor.
is the manipulation.
Sustained.
Non-responsive.
Answer is stricken in its entirety. Jury is to disregard. Ask the question again.
Dr. Gerdes, listen to my question carefully. As far as the potential of cross-contamination of this item that you described on your direct testimony, wouldn't it be important to know if Colin Yamauchi extracted DNA from all the swatches that were received or just some of them?
It would be important as to the potential of contamination from that point on, but that does not control for the entire process of what happened in terms of manipulation and handling at the crime scene prior to that.
So your answer is it would be important.
It's one aspect.
Dr. Gerdes, with regard to item number 52, that is another blood drop at Bundy, correct?
Yes,
Can you describe for us the history of that item?
that's, I believe I already have. It's in that same exact sequence.
All right. Can you tell us how many swatches were collected for item number 52?
I don't have that information with me.
As
May the witness have papers to refresh his recollection?
Do you have them to refresh
Of
his
course.
recollection?
well, I'm sorry, Your Honor. I think
That's true.
I'm given the right to ask questions if I
You
may.
are.
Your Honor,
Well, excuse
my
me,
objection
the
to this
objection.
process, he says he doesn't
Sit down.
recollect.
Sit down. Proceed.
You don't recall independently how many swatches were collected for item number 52, correct?
That's correct.
With regard to that particular item, RFLP results were obtained by Cellmark, correct?
That's correct.
With regard to the potential of cross-contamination that you described 2 days ago, wouldn't it be important to know how many swatches of the ones that were collected were extracted by Colin Yamauchi for DNA?
No.
So item 52 is different from item 50?
No, what I'm saying is that I tried to explain it, and that is that you basically doesn't matter how many swatches. Those swatches were all handled together. The number doesn't matter.
Dr. Gerdes, isn't it true some of those swatches were never processed to extract DNA by Colin Yamauchi?
They were all manipulated to be bindled.
Dr. Gerdes, isn't it true not all of those swatches were extracted for their DNA content by Mr. Yamauchi?
Again, it doesn't matter.
Objection, move to strike.
Ask the question for the third time.
Doctor.
Answer the question.
Yes.
Dr. Gerdes, isn't it true Colin Yamauchi did not extract DNA from all of those swatches from the Bundy blood drops?
Some of those were extracted from different individuals at different labs.
Colin Yamauchi didn't extract DNA from some of those samples, correct?
Correct.
Your Honor, I have a series of slides that I would ask to be marked as people's next in order.
564. Do you want the series as 564?
Thank you. And I've previously shown them to counsel, and I would ask that the first one be displayed.
Proceed.
Now, Dr. Gerdes, calling your attention to, and can you see the
May
slide?
I step down, Your Honor?
Would it be easier from down here? Sure. Now, Dr. Gerdes, and for the record, Your Honor, this first slide that will be part of People's Exhibit 564, does the court wish them to be lettered individually?
Yes.
All right, then this would be 564A, entitled Replicate DQA Testing of Items 48, 50, 52. And for purposes of describing this slide A, Dr. Gerdes, does it basically have what appear to be two symbols for a house or building, the bottom of which is labeled EPR, and the notation to the left, 613 drying?
Yes, I see that.
And then an arrow to an icon or symbol again labeled EPR, and to the left labeled 614 sampling.
That's what it says.
All right. Is it correct then that with regard to those three items, that they were in fact dried in the evidence processing room, or EPR, on June 13th? That drying process began.
That's true.
And is it also true that on the next day, June 14th, in the same room, the evidence processing room, that those particular, or at least one of those particular swatches from those samples were sampled by Mr. Yamauchi?
That's true.
Is that consistent with your understanding of the events in this case?
That's my understanding.
All right. Your Honor, with the court's permission, I'd like to display the next slide, which would be B. And B, for the record, contains a symbol.
An additional icon marked serology.
Thank you. Now, Dr. Gerdes, isn't it correct that from June 14th, and in particular from that portion of the samples, from items 48, 50, and 52, which were sampled by Mr. Yamauchi, that they went into the serology section and DNA was extracted by Mr. Yamauchi?
That's correct, as I understand it.
It's your understanding also that what went on that what went from the evidence processing room to the serology room was not all of the swatches that were in fact collected on June 13th.
That's my understanding.
All right, then if we could have what will be labeled Exhibit C, I'm sorry, Slide C, which has added another symbol labeled Parker Center.
Yes.
Is it also correct that as part of the DNA typing process of portions of some of the swatches, that following the extraction of DNA, that DNA that had been extracted by Mr. Yamauchi was taken to Parker Center for the amplification portion of the test?
That's true.
And in fact, that amplification portion also includes the development of the strips so that results can be read, right?
That's true.
And even photography as well to record those results so that they can be reviewed later.
That's true.
Is this, in fact, Slide C, an accurate representation of the chain of events for a portion of some of the swatches of items 48, 50, and 52?
It is.
All right, Slide D then, with the court's permission.
Yes.
What this slide has added, Dr. Gerdes, is two symbols to the right of the June 14th sampling EPR symbol, which read ECU and serology, correct?
That's what it says, yes.
And it is true, is it not, that portions of the remaining swatches not sampled, not extracted by Colin Yamauchi, were sent to the evidence control unit?
I believe that's true.
Portions of those remaining portions were returned to the serology unit for purposes of shipment. Isn't that correct?
On that date,
No. As far as the date, I don't want you to assume that it was on June 14th that the
Okay.
sampling date
At
occurred.
a later date, that's true.
All right. Then, Your Honor, I believe it would be Slide E. You described, Dr. Gerdes, how, and I believe you described the date of June 24th, that, again, portions of the original swatches were sent to Cellmark, correct?
That's correct.
We're talking 48, 50, and 52 still, correct?
And that would be true for items 40.
Portions as opposed to swatches.
Swatches.
All right, Dr. Gerdes, what was sent as far as items 48, 50, and 52 to Cellmark that you described, I believe, on June 24th?
They were swatches of those particular items.
Those were not swatches that Colin Yamauchi had extracted DNA from, were they?
They're not the same, the swatches he had extracted DNA from, no.
All right, then Slide F, Your Honor. And I believe it could be characterized as including an arrow down from the symbol Cellmark to a circle containing DOJ. Is that a fair description, Doctor?
Yes.
With regard to item number 52, it is correct, is it not, that a swatch or swatches were sent from Cellmark to the Department of Justice for testing, correct?
I believe that's true.
And in fact were ultimately typed by the Department of Justice.
Yes.
Dr. Gerdes, with regard to those samples, and I'm referring to the swatches that were never extracted by Colin Yamauchi, they were never subjected to cross-contamination that you have described that can occur during the extraction of DNA process, correct?
They were not subjected to that at that third step in the process.
In other words, the swatches that went to Cellmark and the Department of Justice, and I'm referring now to the arrows that go right, as well as to Cellmark and DOJ, they were never subjected to any of those steps by Colin Yamauchi to remove DNA.
Not at the extraction stage, but there are earlier stages.
Objection, move to strike the answer, Your Honor, non-responsive.
Sustained. Ask the question again.
Dr. Gerdes, isn't it true that what you described yesterday, actually day before yesterday, about what might have happened to those samples that went to Cellmark and DOJ, as far as DNA extraction cross-contamination, could not have happened?
I wouldn't state it. If you restrict it to only the extraction stage, that's true.
You've described the extraction stage as one of those stages that cross-contamination can occur, correct?
That's correct.
That could not have happened with the Cellmark and DOJ samples, correct?
Not at the extraction stage.
All right. Perhaps you could have a seat again, Doctor. Thank you. Incidentally, Dr. Gerdes, none of these samples went to simply one laboratory, correct?
All of the all of the samples went to LAPD, went through LAPD first.
Well, objection moved to strike. Non-responsive.
Ask the question again.
Dr. Gerdes, isn't it true that none of these samples were typed by one laboratory only?
Of these 3 items you're talking about?
Correct.
They were all typed by more than one lab.
They were typed by 3 different laboratories, correct?
That's correct.
And they were typed using swatches that weren't even typed by LAPD as far as Cellmark and DOJ.
Could you repeat that?
Sure. As far as the swatches typed by Cellmark and the Department of Justice, those swatches weren't even typed by the Los Angeles Police Department, correct?
Those swatches?
The individual swatches.
The items were, the swatches weren't.
Incidentally, as far as the results from items 48, 50, and 52, and I'm referring to the DNA results, they all could have come from Mr. Simpson, correct?
In terms of what is reported as results?
In
Yes.
terms of what was reported by the LAPD.
That's definitely true for item 52 for LAPD. That's true for item 50. And the reason I'm checking this is there were some with very faint C dots that they didn't call. Yes, that is true for that 3rd item too.
So items 48, 50, and 52 all revealed DNA results by the Los Angeles Police Department consistent with Mr. Simpson.
Yes.
As far as Cellmark was concerned, they tested all 3 items as well, didn't they?
Yes,
Those results were all consistent with Mr. Simpson, correct?
they were.
As far as items 48, 50, and 52 by Gary Sims and the Department of Justice, those results were all consistent with Mr. Simpson, correct?
That's correct.
Now, you suggested day before yesterday that there might have been cross-contamination of certain evidence items other than 48 through 52, correct?
Yes.
Dr. Gerdes, isn't it true there are evidence items in this case that were never even touched by Colin Yamauchi?
Yes, that's true.
Isn't it true there are evidence items never even touched by Dennis Fung?
They're all going through the same laboratory.
Objection, non-responsive, move to
Sustained.
strike.
Answer stricken.
There are some items, yes.
There are items never been touched by Dennis Fung, isn't that correct?
That's true.
There are evidence samples that have never been touched by Andrea Mazzola.
That's true.
There are evidence items that have never even been typed for PCR by the Los Angeles Police Department, but have been typed by Cellmark or the Department of Justice.
As far as typing, that's true.
As far as those samples that have not been touched by Colin Yamauchi, Dennis Fung, and Andrea Mazzola, tell us which samples are those.
again, I don't have my notes on that section of the chain of custody. And basically, I'm basing that on what I recall from their testimony.
Okay, wouldn't it be important to know who touched certain items as far as collecting evidence, let's say, as far as the potential of cross-contamination?
It might be important in terms of tracing it to a single individual, but basically, I didn't attempt to trace it to a single individual. It's traced to what the point is there is a from looking at any of those individuals and the record of the laboratory in terms of contamination, there is substantial risk, and I have no confidence.
Objection, move to strike, non-responsive.
Full rule.
And so therefore, I did not
No,
attempt.
That's the end of the answer.
Excuse me.
Next question.
As far as the potential of cross-contaminating another sample, it's different to extract DNA from it than it is to simply package it for shipment. In terms of this risk of contamination,
We've already asked that question.
All right. As far as these samples that were not processed by any of these individuals, and I've mentioned Colin Yamauchi, Dennis Fung, and Andrea Mazzola, correct?
Yes.
As far as all of those samples, you cannot recall now which samples those are. Is that right?
I have a clear, I know that the samples, which are the Bundy blood drops, the Rockingham glove, and Mr. Simpson's reference sample were handled by Colin Yamauchi. I have a definite, absolute, positive, I'm positive of that. As far as other samples such as the sock and perhaps some of the other items, I don't have as clear of a recollection of those.
You discussed during your direct examination 3 items removed from the Bronco automobile, items number 303, 304, and 305. Do you recall that?
I do.
Can you describe for us the history of those items?
Yes, those were collected in June 14th, I believe. And those were processed and extracted on June 15th.
Who collected those items, 303, 304, and 305? And I'm referring to collecting the blood stains. Excuse me, objection, Your Honor. Speaking objection. I'm sorry.
Proceed.
I don't recall who collected them out of the Bronco itself.
So you don't recall who collected them on June 14th?
No.
Who typed them?
They were typed by Colin Yamauchi on the 15th of June.
What were the results by Mr. Yamauchi from items 303, 304, and 305?
303?
303, 304,
I'm sorry, I thought you were
305.
talking about the earlier items, 23, 25. Okay.
I'm sorry, you thought when I said
303.
You thought I said 23 and 25?
I'm sorry, I'm let me back up. The items 303, those were collected in those were the items that were later collected from the Bronco console. So those were the items that were collected at a later date.
When were they collected?
In, I believe it was in July. I don't recall the exact date.
It's actually in August, isn't it?
Or
Dr.
August,
Gerdes?
yes, July or August.
So these three samples, 303, 304, and 305, were not collected in June of 1994.
No, they were collected in July,
They were
or
collected,
August, excuse me.
They were collected over 2 months later, weren't they?
They were,
You do not recall who collected those samples.
not the individual.
All right. What can you tell us about the sequence of events following
I'm
their...
sorry, I do recall who collected them, Colin Yamauchi.
Is it your testimony that Colin Yamauchi collected the stains from the console 303, 304, and 305?
I am not absolutely sure, but I think that it is who did that. I don't have the notes with me.
Dr. Gerdes, isn't it important to know who collected these items in view of your testimony about the potential of cross-contamination?
Not in my opinion, and basically it's important how they were collected, not who collected them.
Isn't it true Michelle Kessler collected those samples?
That may be.
In your opinion, that makes no difference?
It makes, I have observed the testimony of each of these individuals on their procedures as to how they collect items. In my opinion, none of the individuals are collecting these in a manner that a microbiologist would consider safe, and therefore I don't recall the details frequently on who did it. They're all equally risky.
So it's your testimony that all of the individuals in this case and who have been involved in collecting evidence are all risky, as you've used the term.
In terms of what they've described as their collection methods at the crime scene, yes.
As far as 303, 304, and 305, what are the sequence of events after their collection?
Okay, those items were sent to the Department of Justice. After being processed at the LAPD. And they were received there on September 26th.
Were these samples typed by the Los Angeles Police Department?
No,
Did they have DNA extracted by the Los Angeles Police Department?
no,
Were they processed as far as any steps in preparation to extract DNA, for instance, in the serology section of the Los Angeles Police Department?
they were processed in terms of bindling and packaging.
Now, those samples were then typed, correct, by the Department of Justice?
Correct.
All right, Your Honor, I have a slide actually in the form of a copy to place on the Elmo that I'd ask be marked as the People's Next Exhibit in order, a copy of which I've provided to the defense.
565.
565?
May I step down, Your Honor?
Yes. How's your water supply?
All right, Dr. Gerdes, perhaps this item can be described as a title DNA testing of items 303, 304, 305, Bronco console?
Yes.
Is this something known as a flow chart?
Yes, I think that would be a good description, flowchart. Now, the first box to the left, Dr. Gerdes, describes Bronco console removed during search. Is that
Yes.
correct?
Yes.
With a date of August 26, 1994?
Yes.
And to your, or from your review of the records, does that appear to be an accurate description of what occurred on that date?
Yes.
The flowchart then has a second box to the right labeled September 1, 94, and inside that box, swatches made from console and serology, correct?
Yes.
And does that in fact describe accurately what occurred with regard to items 303, 304, and 305?
I believe that does, yes.
Your only hesitation, is that right, is just as to the date?
That's right. I didn't remember the date.
The next box then shows swatches sent to Department of Justice 9/26/94. Is that right?
I don't recall the date exactly, but I believe I just read that off, so yes.
And as far as
That's what I just said, yes.
As far as you know, that's accurate.
Yes.
And then the next box shows 11/22/94, number 305 returned to LAPD.
Correct.
Had the Department of Justice done anything with regard to item number 305 as of November 22nd, 1994?
I'd have to check my notes, but...
All right, would you please, if that would refresh your memory?
Approach for a minute, there's something,
On
you have
this
to
exhibit?
discuss. What? You have to
All
discuss.
right, with the court reporter, please. All right, Mr. Clark.
I think we're waiting for the witness to locate information.
Item 305 from the LAPD was received by...
All right, Dr. Gerdes, you're going to have to tell the jury.
All right, excuse me. According to the report from Department of Justice, they received that on September 7th, item 305.
Dr. Gerdes, are you having a little trouble finding some of these details in your notes about
Well,
the specific... I'm sorry.
There's a
About-
tremendous amount of data
Doctor?
here, and I apologize to the court, but it's a tremendous amount of data, and it's hard to be able to locate these in a short period of time.
All right, Dr. Gerdes, is it fair to say that you're having some difficulty retrieving some of the information about the history of these three samples? that fair?
I think as far as the exact dates and that sort of thing, yes. As far as the general history, no.
Would it be fair to say that the vast majority of the $30,000 that your laboratory has billed in this case, or will bill, was spent looking at the validation studies by the Los Angeles Police Department and not the specific facts and acts in this case?
I don't think that would be fair to say, no.
With regard to item number 305, and it's your testimony that the swatches were sent to the Department of Justice on what day?
September 7th. On the Department of Justice report, it says that LAPD item 305, which they renamed DNA 30, was received on September 7th, 1994 by Mr. Stevens. And I have a SlotBot result on that item on 9/23/94 by Renee Montgomery, and a D1S80 result on DNA 30 on 10/17/94.
All right. As far as the date, then, you believe instead of September 26th, it should be September 1st?
September 7th.
7th, I'm sorry. As far as that item, after it was received at the Department of Justice, and you just described some DNA typing steps that were taken with regard to 305, correct?
Correct.
Did it or was it later returned, the remaining sample from 305, to the Los Angeles Police Department? As is reflected in the next box on the flow chart.
I believe some of it was, yes.
Did there also come a time, and the flow chart makes comes down, makes a left turn, and starts a second row, correct?
Yes, I'll have to get down.
If that would be easier, that's fine. And what's noted is the date March 9th, 1995, number 305 returned to DOJ. Is that right?
Yes.
And is that, in fact, an accurate description of what occurred?
I believe so.
There's then a notation on the same date that all items were returned to LAPD. Is that correct?
Sometime they did that. I'm not sure of that date.
Okay. You're just not sure of the date of March 9th, but in fact, 303, 304, and 305 were returned to the Los Angeles Police Department, correct?
Correct.
Your Honor, would this be an appropriate time to stop on the chart?
Yes.
All right.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, let me ask you, I need to take up an issue out of your presence. Would you please step into the jury room and we'll summon you out shortly? The record should reflect that all the jurors have withdrawn from the courtroom. Counsel, my understanding is that there is an objection by the defense to mention of the combined swatches and RFLP testing that is being conducted by the Department of Justice, and that objection is based upon the fact that the defense has all along asked for permission for access to those swatches to do its own testing, that these swatches have continuously been in the possession of the prosecution or their testing agencies and not available to the defense for their own testing, that months ago, and I don't recollect the specific date, the court gave the prosecution permission to continue their testing as to these items 303, 304, and 305, the Bronco console swatches that were taken in August. The court gave permission to the prosecution to combine those swatches and to attempt to conduct RFLP testing, and that it was anticipated that because of the low amount of DNA that was there, that this process would likely take a considerable period of time. My understanding is that there is a defense objection because the Department of Justice, despite the court's permission, did not actually commence this testing for a significant period of time, approaching 2 months. And that this result, the RFLP results, are therefore not appropriate to be presented by the prosecution in their case in chief. One, because obviously they have concluded their case in chief, and two, because of the unexplained and unjustified delay in the starting of the RFLP testing. Is that my understanding of your argument?
Well, that's the beginning of it, but the full thrust of it is this, and it's a simple one I think we can resolve at the moment, and that is that whether or not this evidence, and first of all, there's no results reported. So we're talking only about a process that's ongoing. Whether or not these results would be admissible in the prosecution's rebuttal case is a question which I'm certain the court had agreed and the parties had agreed would be dealt with at that time. In fact, I think your words were, this is a problem I don't have to deal with yet. And the results aren't even here yet. It was my mistake that yesterday, this was not, they gave us copies, Xerox copies of all the charts except for these last two flow charts. And when I looked at the flow charts, I actually pointed out to Mr. Harmon that on another one concerning the carpet, they'd made a mistake on a date. But I did not notice these last two boxes because when my eyes glazed over it, I thought it was just the history of the sample. I didn't see these last two boxes, so that was my mistake. And I didn't realize, therefore, that they were going to try to raise the fact that there was RFLP testing ongoing. Now, this witness, frankly, there's no documentation, no written documentation of this. In other words, the testing that's ongoing, and he has no knowledge of it, obviously, because we have no reported results. So I believe that it is improper at this time for the prosecution to ask a question of this witness, well, which is what they intend to do. Well, if there were an RFLP result on the combined broncho stains, would that change your opinion with respect to these samples? Because I don't think there's been any ruling, and there shouldn't be a ruling until we reach the point where they try to offer a rebuttal and have results.
Isn't his answer likely to be, well, because these were PCR swatches first, any contamination that's attendant to those, and these swatches are inherently suspect because they were left in the environment until August. I mean, isn't that a pretty simple answer?
Well, no, because what, as the end of my direct examination indicated, and as what's going to be going on, I'm certain in the rest of Mr. Clark's cross-examination, is that there are differences as to each individual item. I anticipate, and well, on direct examination, Dr. Gerdes indicated that he did not have a quarrel and did not believe cross-contamination could be a problem with a whole series of RFLP results in this case for two reasons. Number one, the amount of DNA involved in the RFLP test approaching 100 nanograms was so high that cross-contamination was not a likely explanation. And number two, in terms of the history of the samples, those samples were not processed in the presence of a reference sample from the person or persons who the typing came back. And Dr. Gerdes' testimony on the RFLP and cross-contamination is limited to number 52, handled in the evidence processing room.
You're anticipating that Mr. Clark is going to say, now, if these results were corroborated by RFLP, then you would have the same non-objection. Is that what you're anticipating?
I'm anticipating he's going to ask him if these results were corroborated by an RFLP, would you, right, and the point is we don't have the data from that RFLP, we haven't seen it, and so no scientific evaluation can be made. That's number one, so it's an unfair question in that respect. And number two, we have a whole argument here about whether that would be proper rebuttal given the nature of this testimony, which is not an issue that should be broached now. The only reason it's even being broached now, frankly, was my inadvertence in seeing a box on this chart that says RFLP testing ongoing today. And even if the court were to allow him to ask a question about that box, he shouldn't be able to ask any more questions about test results that have not yet been reported, that have not yet been performed. It's totally speculative, and frankly, it's dirty pool. My mistake for not observing that box, but it violates everything we'd agreed to previously.
Well, counsel, let's, it's not dirty pool if it was given to you and you had the opportunity to see it.
My mistake on that. I'm just saying that I
All
didn't
right.
notice it, and I'm confident that the...
I'm not tolerating any more of this stuff.
Which stuff?
Disparagement of the other side.
Oh.
All right, so let's not do that.
Your Honor, my apologies for that. I think my record is pretty clean in that. I don't do that.
All right, but the
But
thing
I'm-
is,
I'm
it's
ups-
not dirty pool if you were
Not,
shown.
no, I missed that. What I'm saying is, I missed it. I should have noted it because plainly it was something that we'd agreed to take up at
Okay.
another time.
Mr. Harmon.
We had agreed to take it up at another time, and they've raised the specter of it, I think, 2 weeks ago, and we've been willing to do it whenever they wanted to bring it up. I think the court recalls the context of, Mr. Scheck always says, well, we're going to bring this up, we're going to bring this up. And
All right, Mr. Harmon, let me
Sure.
stop you.
I'm sorry, Your Honor.
First of all, good morning.
Good morning.
Secondly, what is the status of the RFLP testing at
I
DOJ?
probably should have told you that.
That would be nice to know.
Apologize. We have now produced a 3-probe RFLP match, which shows a mixture which is consistent with the blood of the defendant, Mr. Simpson, and the blood of Ronald Goldman. And however much time permits, we'll continue to probe it, and if suddenly we exclude that on the 4th or 5th probe, that'll be fine, but that's highly unlikely. So that's what they fear, the other shoe. I can address the timing. I can address any of the issues there. It sounds like the biggest complaint right now is we don't have to deal with it yet. And I can't speak for Mr. Clark. This is a little awkward. I'm arguing this issue in the context of his witness, but the intention only was to ask a hypothetical, which is based on what in fact has been done. And I just need to clarify, when Mr. Scheck says we haven't seen it, he's obviously excluding the guy who's never been in the blue chair, Dr. Blake, because he's seen all this stuff. He's had access to it. I don't know if he's seen the 3rd probe. He had an appointment 2 days ago, and he couldn't show. But he knows these results. He's had access to it. If he's failed to communicate with them, we know he doesn't talk to Dr. Gerdes very much, so that's not our fault. They've known what these results are. They know the instant they're available, and so I don't think that's a legitimate legal complaint, and I don't think that's a sincere statement because it's not, in fact, what's going on with this case. We do have to deal with it. They've wanted to deal with it. As you recall, it's come up a couple of times, and as recently as I think last Wednesday, Ms. Clark informed me that we were going to do it Thursday morning, and I spent hours on the phone with Mr. Sims that night working out the chronology of it, and then for whatever reason they chose not to bring it up. I think this is a tactical decision, so I can address timing. I'd like to clarify that they have had access to whatever remains of those since March, because we proceeded with the court's permission with the combination of those samples back in March. And I can't tell you right now what remains, but I know, I'm almost positive at least one swatch has always remained from 305. I'm not certain on that. So the idea that they've been denied access is it's not true. It's not the reality. It's not the case. I can explain the whole chronology, but that doesn't seem to be the basis for the objection. The objection seems to be we don't have to deal with it yet because it's not proper for rebuttal, and we say, well, we just want to ask a hypothetical that's based on the reality of it, so we don't have to drag Dr. Gerdes back here and confront him with it. So I think I've addressed the specific basis for their objection today. I'd be happy to discuss any of the other issues that I thought were germane, but I don't see that there's a need to. We would just like to ask them because obviously they seem to have conceded that the stuff in the console may have been, it may have been from some phantom, but it has nothing to do with this case. So those results, they seem to have conceded the legitimacy, and there's been absolutely no discussion by Dr. Gerdes on a technical basis of any complaints about what's there, and in fact, the results are corroborative, totally corroborative of the relative intensities of the mixtures.
No, he's testified to his concerns that those samples were left out in the environment and unprotected, and he's expressed a lot of concerns about that, about the Broncos.
I don't recall them being specific to those stains.
Well, that
but
pretty much covers it, wouldn't you say?
sure, unless somebody planted them on August 25th and then they weren't out there very long. So I guess that's the alternative theories that still persist till today.
Yeah, but then there'd be EDTA in it, wouldn't there?
Unless, but you know where that goes. We
Okay,
could,
we've been down that road already.
yeah.
All right, Mr. Scheck.
I think that the argument admits too much. They want to ask him a hypothetical question about a set of test results that haven't been reported. We don't have any quantifications on the amount of DNA in those results. The results, as Mr. Harmon indicates, are not, the testing isn't even completed. So it seems to me that it's highly improper and it ought to be dealt with at the appropriate time. I expressed concerns about this, sure, because I knew the testing was ongoing, and I don't agree with his characterization of the results, frankly,
All
from
right.
what I've been told.
I'm going to sustain the objection to the proposed hypothetical question regarding RFLP testing at this point for this reason. I still have the concern about the delay in the starting of the testing and whether or not any of that RFLP results will be admissible before this jury. That's an issue that is yet to be resolved. The prosecution still has the ability to recall one of their expert witnesses to say, to evaluate Dr. Gerdes' testimony that RFLP testing, given a high amount of DNA availability, will corroborate the other results. Do you agree with that? Do you agree with that with regards to this particular result, 305 from the Broncos? So they have the ability to present that evidence in an affirmative manner before the jury. So I'll sustain the objection to a proposed hypothetical question. And having said that, let's take our break for 15 at this point. All right, back on the record in the Simpson matter. All parties are again present. All right, Deputy Magnera, let's have the jury, please. And Doctor, why don't you come on up, save a little time here. All right, the record should reflect we've been rejoined by all the members of our jury panel. Dr. John Gerdes is on the witness stand undergoing cross-examination by Mr. Clark. Mr. Clark, you may continue.
Thank you, Your Honor. Morning again, ladies and gentlemen. Dr. Gerdes, day before yesterday, you criticized the results from the console of the Bronco, items number 30 and 31, correct?
Correct.
It's correct, is it not, that items 303, 304, and 305 came from the same general area as items 30 and 31 on the console of the Bronco, correct?
That's correct.
It's correct, is it not, that the DNA types obtained from items 303, 304, and 305 corroborate the results from 30 and 31?
That's correct.
You didn't criticize day before yesterday or yesterday morning the PCR results obtained from items 303, 304, and 305, correct?
Sustained. Phrase the question.
Did you, yesterday or the day before, criticize their PCR results from items 303, 304, and 305?
I did.
Incidentally, with regard to these validation strips, approximately how many did you look at? And I'm referring to not the case-specific results in this case, but the LAPD PCR strips.
The validation strips, how many did I look at?
Approximately.
1,069.
So a little over 1,000.
A little over 1,000.
You looked at each of those individual strips.
I did.
You looked at them carefully.
Yes.
You would look at, for instance, the results reported by the Los Angeles Police Department analysts in those strips.
Yes.
You would look at each of the individual strips, and you would look, well, you look at each of the individual strips, right?
That's correct.
And you would look at each of the individual probes on each strip, is that right?
Each of the probes, meaning the dot signals? Yes.
And you would look carefully at each of those individual dot locations.
Yes.
Because you were looking to see if there was no dot indicated, right?
Correct.
And you were looking to see if there was, for instance, a bright dot on a particular probe. Bright signal.
I basically only determined if I saw something as indicated on that or not. I didn't try to look at intensities.
Well, you did in fact look at intensities on each of those strips, didn't you?
No, I simply looked at whether or not there was something present there that should not. First of all, I looked at the typing result and then determined, these are on, I assume you're talking about the known reference samples or exemplars. On those particular cases, I would simply look at it, the typing result, and then determine if there was human DNA, extra human DNA that would indicate another type there, and that would mean any indication of a signal, faint or dark.
Well, isn't it true that with regard to all of these strips, whether they're from a known person, an evidence sample, a proficiency test, that intensity is very important to look at?
It depends on in which context.
Well, isn't you, and haven't you already described the fact that the intensity of other dots in comparison to this C dot is very important to correctly interpret results?
The C dot is important to determine if there's a minimum amount of DNA required for a typable result. But in the presence of any indication of a mixture, it no longer can be used in interpretation, because in the presence of more than one contributor, the individual that has the more DNA would light up the C dot, and the individual with less DNA may or may not, but would also be observable.
Well, doctor, if you look at, let's take a proficiency test on a blood stain from a sidewalk or from wherever. Isn't the intensity of the C dot very important for an analyst to look at?
In terms of determining if there's a minimum amount of DNA, yes.
And isn't it important to compare the intensity of the C dot to any other dots that show up where there's a reaction?
It's important in terms of the determining that there's a minimum amount of DNA and whether the typable result is greater than that if one is assured that there's a single individual.
Well, doesn't the user guide stress the importance of looking at reactions or dots and comparing their intensity to the C dot?
In terms of obtaining a typable result from a single individual, yes.
So it is important.
In that context, yes.
How many dots or probe, in other words, how many different dots can there be on a sample if all the dots lit up?
Well, there would be the 1.1, 1.2, 1.3, the 2, 3, 4, the C dot, the 1.1, 1.2, 1.3 dot, and the all but 1.3. So that's, what is it, 8?
Isn't there another dot that's the 1 dot?
Yeah, excuse me, I forgot the 1 dot.
Is that, I'm sorry, perhaps...
9,
9 dots?
yes.
If you looked at over 1,000 samples, you had to look at approximately 10,000 dots, didn't you?
Yes,
And did you look at those dots carefully?
I did.
Did you do it in any particular location?
I did it in numerous locations.
So you did it a number of different times for each sample, is that right?
I did.
So you looked, would it be fair to say you looked at, what, at least 20,000 dots? If you did them each more than once?
I believe I looked at those at least 4 times.
So you looked at least 40,000 different dots.
That's correct.
Did you use a magnifying glass or anything of that nature?
No,
Did you use any special lighting of any type?
I looked under different lighting conditions.
How long would you look at each strip?
Oh, it doesn't take that long, really, perhaps 5 or 10 seconds.
Is it your testimony that you can look at a DQ alpha typing strip and in 5 to 10 seconds interpret the results?
Yes,
Isn't it true that in interpreting a DQ alpha typing strip, you have to look if there's any reactions, and if there's reactions, you have to look at them with regard to their intensity?
again, I think I just explained that twice.
I think we did.
Dr. Gerdes, isn't it true that to look at 40,000 different dots, that would take weeks?
I've spent a lot of time on this case.
And in fact, your review of those dots, of those typing strips in the validation studies actually took months, didn't it?
Well, I didn't do it at its full time, but basically over a period of months, I looked at these, yes.
Is it your testimony that all you needed was 5 to 10 seconds to interpret each of these strips?
Or less.
Less than 5 to 10 seconds.
It doesn't take that long.
Did you also, and you've described the fact that you were keeping track of your notes in a chart form or spreadsheet or something like that?
Yes.
And you obviously would take time to do that as well, correct?
To record what I observed, yes.
And as you looked at strips the second time, the third time, and the fourth time, would you make changes to your chart?
Yes.
So you were compiling and recompiling and recompiling.
Yes.
Incidentally, when you made changes, does that mean there were mistakes that you made before that?
Not necessarily.
Were there any instances in which you found that you had made mistakes in your chart?
Well, there were instances where they were on the first time or in a particular light, they were faint, I guess what the DOJ would call hints, that later on I would look back and I would have to make a decision as to whether or not that was real. And basically what I would do on the first run through is just note those areas where I had questions, and I would go back and look at those. I mean, it was never recorded as an absolute result until the final report. They were recorded as questionable. Look at this one, look at it again, go back until you finalize it.
Isn't it true that in many instances of the various notations that you made on your chart about, quote, contaminants, that those included very faint dots?
There are faint dots on, I wouldn't say many, but on a significant proportion of those, perhaps, yes.
Some of them were very hard to see, isn't that true?
Yes, and recall, most of those were recorded by the analyst, and I, as a second analyst, am at a disadvantage in that these strips fade after they dry, and so the analyst might have seen those at darker intensity than I could.
How many casework samples did you review in this study of the May 93 through August of 94 review?
There are substantially fewer casework samples.
Can you give us a number or an approximate number?
Approximate number would be less than 10%,
So what number would that be? Something
less than
under,
100,
so something under 100 casework samples?
yes.
Of the number of casework samples that you looked at, how many did you determine, in your opinion, showed contamination?
I didn't include casework samples unless they were known reference samples, or the positive control, or the negative controls.
Is it your testimony that you can't determine from a casework sample whether or not there's contamination present?
That's true, because I don't know where that sample came from or what conditions it was collected, under which conditions it was collected, so it would be unfair to count those because it's not defined as having come from a single individual.
So is it true that any casework sample you cannot conclude there was contamination because you don't know the history of the sample?
It is true on those samples that are recorded as being evidence items. It's not
Samples-
true on the negative control or the extraction, or the reagent blank, or the positive control, or items that were defined as being reference samples from a given individual.
The samples tested in this case were evidence samples, correct?
Yes,
And they were known samples from known individuals.
yes,
And then there were a series of controls you previously described, correct?
that's correct.
All right, Your Honor, I have two photographs that I'd ask to be marked as next two exhibits.
566 and 67. Have you shown those to Mr. Scheck?
Yes.
Previously.
Vince has a copy of them, but these exact photos.
All right. Proceed.
May I approach the witness, Your Honor?
You may.
Dr. Gertie, showing you what will be, I'm sorry, People's Exhibit 566, I believe can be described as a DNA hybridization record photograph, including both the documentary material as well as a photograph of a series of strips. Is that right, Doctor?
That's correct.
And in particular, does that relate to a hybridization number 182 as to the first photograph?
It does.
As to the second photograph, which will be People's 567, does that appear to be a similar photograph relating to a hybridization record number 184?
Yes, it does.
Do those photographs appear to be accurate copies of the original documents and photographs that you saw at the Los Angeles Police Department?
If I could check for just one
Sure.
moment. Yes, they appear to be the same.
All right, then with the court's permission, I'd like to use the first piece of Exhibit 566.
Yes.
Now, just while we're at abroad, and Doctor, would it be easier for you at the witness stand, or would it be easier for you to come down to see the what's projected, or to operate from the
I believe if I can operate from my photo, it'll be, if I have to go back to the table to look at my recordings, maybe that would be best here at the moment.
That's fine. Now, just in terms of this exhibit, People's 566, this is hybridization record number 182.
I can't
Perhaps
read the monitor,
zoom
but
in just on the upper right-hand corner. Actually, zoom in on the very top of the document.
About the right
over
hand.
to the right-hand side. Yes, this is 182.
And this is a series of 8 strips that were run on May 6, 1994?
Yes,
And is this one of the, as we've used the term, validation studies that you looked at as part of your review?
these are some of the samples I've looked at, yes.
The analyst in this case, or at least in the instance of these 8 samples, was Colin Yamauchi,
That's correct.
and the confirming analyst was Aaron Riley.
That's correct.
Now, is it correct that none of these were casework samples?
No, that's correct.
You identified in this particular set of 8 samples, 2 samples as containing contamination. Is that right?
That's correct.
And would the
Basically, they were identified as contamination and/or DX.
and that was, in your opinion, the result, that is, these reactions of either contamination or this DX gene activity.
In this specific instance, again, these are one dot. They contain a one dot, so this is one of those cases where you can't tell.
Could you tell us, in terms of the photographs that go from top to bottom, and let's start with the first one, which would be easier to start with from your records?
In terms of which one was identified as a contaminant,
Yes.
let's start with number 2.
Okay, that would be the sample, and perhaps we can zoom in on that horizontal strip. In fact, I don't know if you can tell, Doctor, but in terms of talking about both samples, is this zooming point going to be enough to be able to describe both samples that you have offered opinions about?
Yes.
All right. Now, the second sample down is labeled off to the far right 52-2,
Yes,
and the analyst noted a particular result with that sample. Is that right?
that's correct.
What did the analyst note?
A 1.2, 1.2. And then there's a notation that's difficult to read, but it says with 1.1 very faint.
Okay, is that actually written by the analyst off to the far right?
It is.
Perhaps if we could just show that off to the right of that sample, I'm sorry, by going down into the written portion, the results are actually written in. Isn't that right, Doctor?
That's correct.
I believe
You have
the
to go to the
Mr.
right.
Wood.
And is that, Dr. Gerdes, when you look at the second row down, where you have described 1.2, 1.2, and then is that with, or I'm sorry, weak 1.1?
That's correct. That's what that says.
Okay. And in your opinion, and what you have described in your chart and your summary of your findings, then that 1.1 you have offered the opinion is either a contaminant or this DX activity.
That's correct. You can see it on the photograph. It was recorded by the analyst. It's an additional allele compared to what the analyst has recorded,
And in
and
fa-
therefore represents, this either DX or a contaminant.
And this is because you know the sample's type is a 1.2, 1.2, right? It's from a known person?
That's correct.
All right,
It's
if we
from a
could-
known, this was a proficiency testing, and that was the correct type that it should be.
All right, if we could then zoom in on the strip as we had it previously. And what I'm going to ask you to do when we reach that point, Dr. Gertis, and perhaps we can use the arrows, to actually locate the arrow next to the dot on the sample, the second sample down, where you concluded that there was an additional 1.1 contaminant or DX gene activity.
Do you want me to do that?
Well, would it,
Just-
let's see if we can just place it while you're
Okay.
there. If we
Okay.
take the arrow and go to the left, or go off the screen.
It's on the monitor here still.
I think we just lost our projection. May have to do this the old-fashioned way.
Or ask the jurors to crowd around the monitor, but I don't think that will work.
I think we have lost, it appears to me that we've lost the, our large monitor unit. Matt?
Yes.
All right, how long does it take us to switch in the backup?
15 minutes.
Mr. Clark, what's your pleasure?
I would prefer to continue on based on the foundation I've already laid, rather than interrupt this topic.
All right, proceed. All right, I do have a monitor here in front of juror number one that is still working, is that correct? Matt, how long is the cable on the monitor in front of number one?
About 50 feet. I can move it.
It's a large monitor, it's 20-inch monitor, as I recollect. 21.
May I make a suggestion? I'll proceed if I can do it the old-fashioned way and have the witness place an arrow on the exhibit and then pass it to the jury.
Be my guest.
All right. Certainly used to doing it that way.
That's the way they do it in Oklahoma, I'm sure. You may.
All right, Dr. Gerdes, on what I believe is People's Exhibit 566, if you would, and do you need perhaps you can use a fine...
Yeah,
fine
I don't
pen.
have a fine pen here.
I have a felt tip fine point with that.
Have a regular pen or?
Regular
Felt
pen's
tip would
fine.
be good, I think.
And with regard to that 1.1 allele on that second sample down, in fact, is that sample labeled 52-2?
Yes, it is.
Okay. Could you place an arrow, and if it's possible to do that without interrupting any other of the results, to point out the 1.1 dot where it's located on that sample? And would a circle around it be
That
easier?
would be fine.
Okay.
Okay.
And you've placed that circle?
Yes.
Does that circle then now basically surround the dot where you detected what you believe to be either a contaminant or DX activity?
Yeah, I've circled both the number that designates it, and just to the right of that number is where this dot, very faint dot, is located.
First of all, that dot is clearly less than the C dot, correct?
It is.
And the C dot is important in the correct interpretation of samples, correct?
It's important in the correct interpretation of samples that are known not to be mixtures. Once you have any suspicion of a mixture, it is no longer used for that function.
Well, doesn't the user guide say the C dot is to be used as a guide in interpreting the presence of typable alleles?
Yes, that's what I explained earlier. If the C dot is not present, that's why this is important. If it's not there, you have too little DNA. If it is there, and you have any indication of more than the number of alleles you should have, then it's no longer of any function.
While you have that photograph, was there a second sample that you believed similarly contained a contaminant or DX activity?
Yes, there is.
Okay, would that be how far down?
2 strips down from the one we just discussed, or 52-4.
Could you circle that, a particular 1.1 dot, in
Certainly.
the same manner as the previous one? And you've done that?
I have.
For purposes of your chart, those 2 samples, as a result of that 1.1 activity, were listed as unexpected alleles, correct?
That's correct, because these are proficiency samples, the typing.
Oh, I'm sorry, objection, non-responsive, move to strike.
They're proficiency samples, the typings, expected typings are known. They're not mixtures, they're not supposed to be mixtures as they were provided. And this is an additional allele over those anticipated typing results.
Next question.
Was it listed in your chart?
It was.
If that 1.1 reaction was as a result of this DX gene, it wouldn't be a contaminant, correct?
In this case, you can't tell if it's a DX or not.
Objection,
Sustained.
non-responsive.
That's not the question, Doctor.
Doctor, if that activity in the 1.1 dot was from the DX gene, it wouldn't be a contaminant, would it?
That's correct.
If that 1.1 dot was the result of cross-hybridization because of the presence of the 1.2 allele, then that activity would not be from a contaminant, correct?
Yeah, cross-hybridization is not well known for this particular gene other than the DX phenomenon, but that's true.
So it in fact would be true that it would not be from a contaminant if it was because of cross-hybridization with the 1.2 allele.
That's another explanation for this particular allele.
And in fact, this cross-hybridization is described in the user guide, correct?
It's described in the presence of high levels of DNA, yes.
It's described in the package insert, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
And it's described in the scientific literature about DQ alpha typing.
Yes.
All right, Your Honor, at this time I'd ask that the photograph be passed to the jury.
All right, let's hand it to juror number 7. right, Mr. Clark, would you collect that from Deputy Long, please?
Yes, thank
All right, let the record reflect that all the juror members have had the opportunity to review the exhibit. Mr. Clark.
Yes. Dr. Gertie's now showing you what I believe has been marked People's 567. I believe you've stated already that that appears to be another similar photograph of what was 2 hybridization records later than the previous run.
Yes.
Was that part of the same DQ Alpha run by Colin Yamauchi?
Yes.
And
Same
in-
date.
And in this particular instance, you identified 2 more samples that you believed demonstrated a contaminant.
Yes, 52-20 and 52-22, which is the 4th strip down and the 6th strip down.
Okay, and you've used the identifier 52-20 to describe.
Yeah, basically you could use lane 4 and lane 6.
Okay. You concluded from that run, and again, this is a series of non-casework samples.
Yes, that's correct. They're all standards.
Let's
or proficiency.
Let's start with 52-20. The actual type called by the analyst is a 1.2, 2.
Yes.
You agree with that typing?
Yes.
That was a correct typing?
Yes.
You also, as a result of your review of all of these strips, concluded that in your opinion, there were 2 other alleles present that you felt were contamination.
On that particular strip, yes.
And what alleles were those?
The 1.1 and the 1.3 are visible on that strip.
Could you then, with the pen, circle those 2 alleles, the 1.1 and the 1.3 that you felt were contaminants, as you did with the previous photo?
On 52-20?
Yes.
Okay.
Did you do that?
I did.
Thank you. Also on that same run, you identified another sample as containing contaminating alleles. Is that correct?
That's correct.
That was which sample?
50, well, lane, hold on. That would be lane 6,
And does it have a 52 dash number just for the record?
52-22.
What alleles were called by the analyst?
A 1.13 with a very weak 1.2, 1.34, and a 1.3.
Okay, first of all, the type that's called by the analyst, and I may have misunderstood you. Did you say a 1.1?
1.13.
All right. And then you also described the analyst made some notations about some other dots.
Yes. It's noted very weak 1.2, 1.34. That's that dot that detects all of those, and a 1.3.
Okay, just to be clear, when the analyst wrote down very weak 1.2, 3, and 4, the analyst wasn't noting that the analyst saw a very weak 1.2, a very weak 3, and a very weak 4.
No, that's one dot. That's that dot that you see all 3 of those on that one dot.
So the analyst was really noting, this is a dot that I saw a very weak pattern,
Correct.
not that I saw a very weak of those 3 individual alleles.
That's correct.
Did the analyst make any other notation?
No. Well, the 1.3, which I discussed earlier, yes.
All right. As far as your review and the opinions that you offered as a result of reviewing that strip, did you then conclude that there were contaminating alleles?
Yes, this is a standard. It should only have the 2 types, and it has these additional dots.
And the additional alleles were what?
They would be consistent with a 1.2 and a 1.3.
Now, those alleles, 1.2 and 1.3, were clearly less than the C dot, correct?
Yes, they are.
As far as the call on the sample by the analyst, do you agree with the call of the actual typing results?
Yes.
The typing results of 1.1 and 3 were called correctly by the analyst. Is that right?
That's true.
With regard to, and you described the fact that this sample, the person actually has the 1.1 allele, correct?
Yes.
If the reaction in the 1.2, and again, the 1.2 is a very close probe to the 1.1, right?
There's a single base pair difference.
If the 1.2 reaction were as a result of cross-hybridization, it would not be a contaminant, correct?
That phenomenon is not reported to be a problem with that particular dot, but
Objection non-responsive,
theoretically,
Your
yes.
Honor.
We'll
So the answer is yes?
Yes, but it's not been reported to be a problem on that dot.
When you say it's not recorded to be a problem, what do you mean?
In laboratories, the number of laboratories I've looked at, and in the literature, there's no report that the 1.2 cross-hybridizes.
Dr. Gerdes, isn't it true the scientific literature does describe cross-hybridization of all of the 1 subtypes, 1.1, 1.2, and 1.3?
As far as what's observed in laboratories, the 1.1 and the 1.3 are observed.
Objection non-responsive, Your Honor.
Sustained.
Dr. Gerdes, doesn't the scientific literature describe cross-hybridization between all 3 of the 1 subtypes, 1.1, 1.2, and 1.3?
I don't believe so.
If the 1.3 allele, and we discussed just the 1.2 at this point, correct?
That's correct.
If the 1.3 allele were from cross-hybridization, it would not be a contaminant, correct?
That's true.
All right, Your Honor, then with the court's permission, I'd like this particular photograph be passed to the jury.
Would you like me to mark those dots?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, please, Doctor.
Okay.
All right, Mr. Clark, would you hand that to juror number 7, please?
This relates to logistics.
All right, let the record reflect that I believe that's 567. Mr. Clark, that's 567?
Yes.
All right, the record should reflect that all the jurors have had the opportunity to view 567. And Mr. Clark, it's now your request that we do use the projector for the next items.
Actually, if I could have about 2 minutes with a board, then I would like to use the projector.
Well, we're missing one of the jurors now,
All
so
right.
why don't we just take a break right now? Let's take 10 minutes. Mr., you got 10 minutes to swap that out. All right. All right, let me have the jurors step back in the jury room. We're going to of our jury panel. Mr. Clark, you may continue.
Dr. Gerdes, you have conceded that if in fact a signal, such as in the photographs that have been shown to this jury, are the result of cross-hybridization, then they are not the result of contamination, correct?
Correct.
As far as the creation of your chart, and in fact there were a number of charts shown to the jury that discussed and had bars or graphs of contamination, you recall those?
I do.
In those instances in which, for instance, there is cross-hybridization instead of contamination, those charts are biased as far as the presence of contamination in the LAPD laboratory, correct?
I think we tried to explain what the degree of bias would be. And so, for instance, on the 1.1, that was 7.6% of the strips. And on the 1.3, that was 25%. So if it's biased, we attempted to explain the bias.
In other words, the way the charts are written assumes that what might be cross-contamination is contamination.
Objection. Argumentative sustained.
Do those charts reflect, then, and include in those graphs of contamination incidents which may be the result of cross-hybridization?
Only for the specific case of the 1.1 allele and the 1.3 allele.
Is it then the case that what may be a graph that you show 100% of runs contaminated, that if in fact the 1.3 and 1.1 alleles are present, then those charts overstate the contamination?
I don't believe so, because the reason I analyzed it in that manner was to look at more than one strip to attempt to find a confirmation.
Does that mean, Dr. Gerdes, when you describe the 25% and the 7.6%, that your charts may overstate the contamination at the Los Angeles Police Department by over 32%?
Objection, vague question.
Remember, those are the percentage of those specific alleles, and those are only 2 of the 6 alleles. So in terms of, if I could look at my notes.
Do you need to look at your notes for some answer, portion of this answer?
For an example, yes, for an answer. If we sum the total 1.1 plus 1.3 that could possibly be DX or cross-contamination, that could be 16.5% of those alleles.
Well, Dr. Gerdes, what I'm asking is when you say the month of May of 1994, and you show, and I'm not trying to give an exact number for the month of May, let's just assume you have a number, whether it's 40%, 50%, or 60%. You have a bar graph that approximates that percentage, correct?
Objection, vague as to which chart, which bar graph.
Sustained.
With regard to these graphs, there's one that describes run contamination and strip contamination for May, June, and July, correct?
Correct.
As far as that particular graph, and let's assume for May there's a certain percentage of strip contamination, whatever that is, all right?
Yes.
That figure, whatever that percentage is, does that include these 1.1 and 1.3 instances?
This states the chart. This chart speaks for itself.
Are you talking about the strip chart or the run chart?
Talking about the chart that has both.
Now, on the strip chart, those would be included. On the run chart, the entire date would be evaluated with one sample versus the other so that I can confirm whether that or not that was contamination or not.
I'm not sure you can see that from there. Perhaps if you would, could you step down?
And this is 1297, if I recollect correctly.
Yes, thank you, Your Honor. Dr. Gerdes, with regard to this particular exhibit, is this the chart that I just questioned you about as far as demonstrating for May, June, and July your opinion of contamination levels by both runs and strips?
Yes, it is.
All right, Doctor, would you just take a half step back so the court, you're shielding the court reporter. Thank you.
And if I could, Dr. Gerdes, let's take June, where there's an indication of 33% of strips.
Excuse me, you're pointing to May?
I'm sorry, yes, you're right. Referring to May, where there appears to be a green block that includes strip contamination and/or artifacts. Is that right?
That's correct.
Does that 33% include the 1.1 alleles?
At that point, it does, yes.
Does it include the 1.3 alleles?
Yes, it does.
The 1.1 alleles can be the result of DX activity and not contamination, correct?
That's true.
The 1.3 activity can be a result of cross-hybridization under your own testimony, correct?
That's true.
33% includes both of those, doesn't it?
It does.
And in fact, if those are not from contamination, those overstate the percentage of contamination, don't they?
They would by less than 16% overall.
So it's your view that it only overstates it to a certain extent, but the chart is still correct.
If I can explain, can I explain that?
Well, the
No.
question is,
No, no.
under
Your Honor,
the...
may the witness explain?
No?
He has
to answer the question. He can explain his answers on redirect examination.
Dr. Gerdes, my question to you is, in your opinion, does the 33% then overstate the occurrence of contamination if, in fact, those 1.1 and 1.3 alleles are not from contamination?
With regards to that specific strip, this specific bar, that might be overstated. That's why I did the analysis the way I did to look to the next one over, which is the run contamination. So if we can look at May specifically, I can explain how I confirm whether or not these are contaminants.
Incidentally, these percentages in your inclusion of those 1.3 and 1.1s, was that also true in the 31% in June?
That's why it's labeled strip contamination and/or artifacts. It's clearly labeled as that. That's what it is.
Objection non-responsive, Your Honor.
Sustained. Ask the question again.
Dr. Gerdes, when you calculated 31% for the month of June, did that include the 1.1 and 1.3 alleles that may not be from contamination?
Yes.
The 17% reported in July, did those also include the 1.1 and 1.3 alleles that may not be contamination at all?
Yes.
All right. Thank you, Doctor. You may resume the stand. Photograph, now that the projector is back, I'd ask to be marked as People's
568.
which I've previously shown to counsel.
Proceed.
Dr. Gerdes, showing you one more photograph. Does that appear to be another hybridization record photograph that you reviewed as part of your review of the strips at the LAPD?
If I could just check it.
Sure.
It does.
And that particular run was conducted, well, that reflects a certain hybridization record number.
Hybridization 101.
And do you have a Xerox copy of what's contained?
No, I have a photo.
And a photo as well?
Yes.
Your Honor, with the court's permission, I'd like to display this photo. for purposes of identifying this particular photograph, Dr. Gerdes, what date was this run conducted?
1/14/94.
So January of 94.
Correct.
And the analyst was whom?
Aaron Riley?
Now, and the confirming analyst was Colin Yamauchi?
Yes.
This was one of the strips that you looked at as part of your review of the LAPD DNA work?
This series of strips, yes.
What was contained on this series of strips?
The first 5 items are actually evidence items. Then there is a standard number 5, a negative control, and then another evidence item.
Okay, when you say the first 5 items were casework, that's casework but not related to this case, correct?
That's correct.
In other words, this is an example of your review of their work that included actual other criminal cases, but not this one.
That's correct.
Is that why it has a number that appears to be 93- and then a series of numbers?
That's a code number for a different case, yes.
And as part of your review, that type of number tells you that it's casework, correct?
Correct.
Instead of like CTS or known reference samples and so forth.
Correct.
Now, in this particular instance, the analyst, and there were 8 strips run in this instance?
On this particular page, yes.
Now, if we could focus in on the written results column off to the far right. That column and the first 5 strips, are evidence samples again, correct?
That's correct.
The next sample, which is in, what would it be, number 6, is labeled standard number 5,
Correct.
and that would be a known blood from a known person.
Correct.
Or positive control.
It's a positive control, yes.
Below that is labeled neg control,
Yes.
and is that what's referred to as a reagent blank or cloth control?
That's correct.
And then lastly, is there another casework sample,
That's correct.
which looks like it has a number beginning with 89?
Correct.
Does that indicate the year of the case?
I believe so.
So is it the case then that the Los Angeles Police Department DNA laboratory would actually look at cases that were, for instance, several years old as part of their DNA typing?
Apparently that's true.
Now, off to the right, where all the results are written, there appear to be many different alleles noted for all the samples, correct?
That's true.
As part of the review of a run, an analyst wants to look at the negative control, for instance. Is that right?
Correct.
And is that the type of control that an analyst would look at first?
Generally, yes.
Or if not first, very close to first?
Yes.
Because that control is very important in determining whether or not a PCR run is contaminated.
Correct.
Now, in this particular instance, the analyst noted, as far as the negative control, the presence of what looked like 4 alleles, correct?
Yes. On the negative control, which again should have no DNA, there's a 1.2, a 2, a 4, and a 1.1.
Now, if we could move up to the appropriate strip, where the actual dots are noted, that would be the second strip from the bottom, Dr. Curtis?
Correct. From the
And we'll see if we can place an arrow just so it's clear which strip we're referring to. And it would be second from the bottom, Dr. Gerdes?
That's correct.
Is the arrow currently pointing to that particular strip right there?
Yes.
Now, that negative control should show no dots in any of the probes,
No,
correct?
it should be totally clean. There should be nothing there.
And we're seeing a 1 dot,
Yes.
a 2 dot,
Yes.
a 4 dot.
Yes.
Is there a C dot?
Yes. On my photo there is.
But faint, would that be a fair description?
Yes.
Is there a 1.1 dot?
Yes.
Similarly faint?
About the same as C.
Now, the 1.2, 1.34 dot, without getting into its interpretation in this particular sample, is showing a clear reaction, correct?
It is.
Is there a reaction in the 1.3 dot?
No.
And lastly, the all but 1.3, that's going to basically show a reaction if any allele is present other than the 1.3, right?
Correct.
So that's another sample that you use to interpret the results.
Yes.
Now, if we could go back to the actual results section, and just first before we do that, then this is a signal to an analyst that there is a problem with this run, correct?
Yes.
It's a clear signal, isn't it?
This is gross contamination.
All right, if we could return to the results column in the written portion and go to the far right, and that's fine as far as zoom in or zoom out. There is the appearance of many alleles in each of these samples, correct?
That's correct.
It's fairly easy to determine that there's contamination in this run, correct?
Yes.
And in fact, the analyst noted that contamination, correct?
They did.
It's correct that the controls worked in this instance in revealing contamination, correct, Dr. Gerdes?
In this particular case, yes.
And in fact, they clearly worked.
In this particular case, yes.
Dr. Gerdes, as far as the materials you received in this case, you were provided, I believe you described, materials relating to DNA testing by LAPD,
Yes.
Cellmark,
Yes.
and the Department of Justice.
Yes.
And did you review all of those materials?
I did.
You are also provided, and in particular, reports from each of those laboratories.
That's correct.
I'm referring to DNA work as well. As far as
Specifically,
reports.
yes.
Were you provided any of the serological reports, that is, the results obtained by conventional serology?
No.
Were you provided bench notes relating to the DNA work?
Yes.
Were you provided all of the x-rays or autoradiographs?
The majority, yes.
Are there some you're aware of that you were not provided?
Yes.
What about the D1S80 films, or they're somewhat like autoradiographs in appearance, correct?
Yes.
Were you provided those?
Yes.
Were you provided photographs, for instance, of typing strips? And I'm referring to the casework itself in this case.
Yes.
Were you provided photographs of product gels, as they're called, where there's an evaluation of the presence of DNA and how much?
Yes.
Were you provided photographs, or other, let me rephrase that. Were you provided x-rays or copies of those x-rays of what are called slot blots that are another method of determining approximately how much DNA is present?
I have not seen the original slot blots from either the DOJ or from Cellmark. As far as the autorad itself, I've seen Xerox copies.
So you haven't seen any of the slot blots that quantitate.
I've seen the recorded results. I have not seen the autorad that goes with that other than a copy.
Does Cellmark record the actual amounts from a slot blot, or is the x-ray the data from which they interpret it and don't note it in a written document?
They don't note it.
So therefore, is it correct that you've seen no reports or photographs detailing the amount of DNA that Cellmark determines from a sample?
Not directly from Cellmark.
Have you received it from some other source?
From the Department of Justice
Well, I'm referring
on
to
the
Cellmark.
same item.
I'm sorry, maybe I didn't make it clear.
It was related to me through just, I believe it was related to me through discussions with testimony by Robin Cotton, and I read those testimonies in which she specifically stated what the DNA amounts were on the items in question.
Were you provided materials about proficiency testing by all three laboratories?
Yes,
And did you review all of that material?
yes,
Were you provided, and you've already described receiving and reviewing each of the validation DQ alpha strips at the Los Angeles Police Department, did you review validation materials from the other two laboratories as well?
I did.
Did you review the accreditation materials from Cellmark Diagnostics, that is accreditation by the American Society of Crime Laboratory Directors?
I've seen documents related to that, yes.
And were those documents specific to Cellmark Diagnostics?
Yes,
Were there also similar materials from the Department of Justice that you received and reviewed?
I may have, I don't recall offhand seeing the specific document on that.
You have described reading some of the transcripts in this case, that is, transcripts of testimony.
I read the transcripts of individuals that related to DNA. I haven't read the transcripts of the entire case.
What witnesses' testimony have you read the transcripts of?
Mazzola, Fung, Colin Yamauchi, Gary Sims, Renee Montgomery, Robin Cotton, and I may have forgotten somebody, but basically anyone who dealt with either sample collection or DNA analysis.
That's a lot of transcripts, isn't it?
It is.
Can you approximate for us how many hours you've spent just reading those transcripts? Or days or weeks, whatever's easier.
Perhaps, all total a week or two time.
1 or 2 weeks to read the transcripts of each of those witnesses, all of those witnesses?
Perhaps a week or two, yes.
Have you received any videotapes for your review?
I've seen clips of videotapes, but I've never received them myself.
By clips, do you mean on television?
Yes, on TV or played during the course of the trial.
As opposed to a videotape that you received and watched?
I did not receive any videotapes.
Are there any other materials that you were provided with respect to this case?
I believe you've covered most of them.
You reviewed all of those materials, correct?
Yes.
You made notes as a portion of your review?
Yes.
You compiled a chart?
Yes.
As far as your notes, how many notes, can you state it in terms of pages, how many notes you took? And I'm setting aside the chart with the raw data on it.
Most of my notes were taken during the, I had 1 or 2 pages of notes on the lab site visits. I had perhaps a page or 2 involved in analyzing or looking at the strips for each particular area as far as just summarizing, and that's all.
You've used the term site visit. Site visit has a special meaning in science, doesn't it?
Well, it can.
What does it mean?
Well, that's what you would call, for instance, if you were applying for a grant from the NIH and they requested a site visit, that would simply mean they wanted to come and look at your lab and inspect it.
That's a fairly formalized procedure, isn't it, for an inspection of your laboratory?
Yes,
And in fact, that inspection can have serious consequences to the laboratory, correct?
that's correct.
A site visit is performed by unauthorized personnel, for instance, from a government agency, right?
Correct.
Is it your view that your visits to each of the laboratories in this case were site visits?
Now, perhaps it's a misnomer. I visited the laboratory. I'm under no authority of any accrediting agency or anything like that.
When you reviewed the results and all of this raw data, did there ever come a question in your mind about how a result was interpreted or how a procedure was in fact undertaken by the analyst?
I was provided with all of the protocols from the laboratory, so I had access to those materials.
Well, what I'm asking, though, is other than from the materials, even if you reviewed all of those, were there any questions in your mind about how an analyst performed a particular task? Did that ever happen?
Based on all the information I have, all of those things we just discussed, no.
So from your review of the materials, you had no questions whatsoever?
No, and remember, I've seen these, with the specific example of Cellmark and DOJ, I've done other cases involved in those particular laboratories, so I'm familiar with their protocols and procedures.
And you felt that that was a sufficient familiarity so that you could review all of these materials from all of these samples and have no questions of the analysts whatsoever?
If you've ever seen Gary Sims' notes, they're extremely detailed. All you have to do is read the notes.
And that was, in your view, sufficient for you to be able to render all of your conclusions thus far in this case?
Yes.
Am I, Your Honor?
Uno más.
Protocols that you have described previously as being used in your own laboratory, do you always follow, or do your technicians always follow those protocols exactly?
In any laboratory, you have the protocol is followed as carefully as possible and exactly as possible. If there's any situation that occurs where that can't be the case, then the technician is instructed to ask the director whether or not changes can be made and which changes can and can't be made.
Thank you.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to take our recess at this time for the day. Before we do that, I just wanted to bring one matter to your attention before we conclude today. About a year ago, when I first was assigned this case, I received a lot of unsolicited resumes from people who wanted to come work for the court, and I got literally dozens of these. And I got one in particular that I recollect because it looked interesting, but it went in the same place that all the others went, which is into the round file. This individual persisted and sent it again, and so I figured at least I would read it again more seriously, and it turned out that this person was a high honors graduate from Claremont McKenna College, which, as you know, is one of this country's finest small liberal arts colleges here on the West Coast, that she had scored in the high 90s percentile on the LSAT. And looking at her work experience, it was impressive, a number of things that she had done. And the thing that really caught my eye is that she had worked as a speechwriter for a member of Parliament in Great Britain. So I took her on as a volunteer non-law clerk, since she had not gone to law school yet. And I figured if nothing else, I can at least have her go pick up my robe at the laundry and save me the time to do that. And she has been with us almost a year as a complete volunteer at no cost to the taxpayers of our county. And actually, as you know, she's probably saved the taxpayers thousands of dollars with all of the goods and services that she's gotten for you, all the free meals at the restaurants, all the entertainment, all the wonderful things that have happened. She's also been introduced to basic legal research by the Pepperdine law students who work for me. And, you know, her primary job was to keep you all entertained. And I think she's done a great job. She now leaves us to begin her studies at a prestigious law school on the East Coast. And I know that you join with me in wishing her good luck with her studies. We all know that given her demonstrated talents, that she will obviously be highly successful in whatever it is that she chooses to do in her career. And in fact, I suspect that in my years of retirement, my claim to fame will be that she was once my law clerk. And we thank you very much. All right, and now, having said that, please remember all my admissions to you. Don't conduct any deliberations until the matter has been submitted to you. Don't form any opinions. Don't allow anybody to communicate with you. Have a wonderful weekend. As far as the jury is concerned, we'll see you all Monday morning, 9 o'clock sharp. Dr. Gerdes, you may step down, 9 o'clock Monday. All right, you all have a nice weekend.